How are your ideas truly protected? And no, this is not an ad read. Today we're going to talk about plagiarism in two real-world cases and what I want you to consider about these alleged, I think I have to legally say it like that, these alleged plagiarism cases is where is the line between inspiration, iteration, and theft? What do you do if you see similarities between a story that you wrote and something that someone else wrote? And what if their book became an international bestseller? What would you do if someone stole your story? Welcome to the Writing Theory Podcast, a podcast for every level of writer. Everything that we discuss here on this podcast is about pushing you to the next level of storytelling. From prose to structure to the business of writing. You can join me every Monday for a new episode, a new topic, and a new takeaway that you can apply to your own writing right away. I'm Carson Long. Let's get started. I've been obsessed with these two stories over the past year or so, and I hope that you find them just as interesting as I do. We're going to start out small with a controversy, I guess, that originated on Reddit when a user there posted about seeing some startling similarities between a highly public author and so many of the books that inspired them. And before we even get to details, I want to ask you this. At what point does a story become unoriginal? At what point does influence turn into something more sinister? And at what point does it stop being coincidence and start being nefarious? There is a very public figure in our space. And our space in this case kind of means like the self-publishing, like the writer improvement, the want to make you a better, stronger, more successful storyteller kind of space. That space, right? And that could extend everything to like Kindlepreneur, to writing theory, to YouTube channels or websites or podcasts or whatever it may be that wants to help you become a successful author. There's a very public figure in this space, and their name is Mark Dawson. Mark Dawson is an author with dozens of novels out there in the world, ranging from thrillers to YA and kids books, but more than just being an author, they are very present in trying to help you become a more successful author. They run this, I should rephrase. In the past, they have run the Self-Publishing Show, which is a podcast that has over 400 episodes with features from all sorts of authors and agents and editors and business people within this self-publishing industry. They were also behind the Self-Publishing Formula, a platform that helps authors understand how to better make a living through self-publishing, and there's, at least reported on their website, over 5,000 students. And all of this to say, Mark Dawson was very vocal and prevalent and successful. Until about a year ago, when a Reddit post seemingly came out of nowhere. The OP has since deleted their account. But the OP had found a large number of very striking similarities between Mark Dawson books and other books that seemed to inspire him. And look, there's nothing wrong with inspiration, of course. You know how I feel, about this, because I tell you all the time, go learn from your favorite authors. Study how they write. Study how they put together stories. Use that inspiration as your guiding force to be a better writer. But the issue here was that Mark Dawson's works contained so many examples of seemingly direct verbiage being taken from elsewhere and then being found later in his own books. So I find that the source of the text that was allegedly copied to be so interesting. All right, so we're going to look at some specific examples. And these are some quotes from an article posted by The Guardian. This is so crazy. The article is called, "William Boyd Interviews James Bond, which was written by William Boyd, which is a fictional account of British writer William Boyd traveling back into time to interview James Bond. And this was kind of meant to be like a promotional piece to accompany William Boyd's James Bond novel coming out called Solo. And that book came out, this article came out, and it seems, as I'm going to read you some quotes, that the prose made a very big impact on Mark Dawson. So here's some quotes that this Reddit user posted claiming that they had found some similarities, and I want to know what you think. Of course, I've sort of cherry-picked the ones that are most egregious to be like, what we can talk about and discuss. So here we go. From 2013, William Boyd interviews James Bond. Quote, "The gaudy harlequinade of youth much in evidence." In 2014, The Driver by Mark Dawson. "The harlequinade of youth much in evidence." Okay, well, that one's pretty clear. In 2013, "The dark-eyed girls in their short dresses and the long-haired young men in crushed velvet and fur-trimmed Afghans." 2014, The Driver by Mark Dawson. "Long-haired young men in vintage suits and fur-trimmed Afghans, and girls in short dresses." Had to throw that last little one in. Here's some more. 2013, William Boyd. "I looked at the bookcases, vaguely surprised to see so many books, always a clue to a personality." From The Driver, "Milton looked at the bookcase, vaguely surprised to see so many books, always a clue to a personality." William Boyd. This is funny. "They were an odd mixture, books on bridge and golf, many novels by Eric Ambler, Graham Greene's The Heart of the Matter, some books on heraldry and the collected poems of Ralph Waldo Emerson. Most unusual." And The Driver. "They were an odd mixture, books on astrology and makeup, novels by Suzanne Collins and Stephanie Meyer, some books on fashion, the collected poems of Ralph Waldo Emerson." Oh. All right, from William Boyd. Most unusual. "I pulled it out to look at the cover. Several pages had their corners turned down. I slipped it back into its slot on the shelf." The Driver. "Milton pulled it out to look at the cover. Several pages had their corners turned down. Not what he would have expected to find. He slipped it back into its slot on the shelf." Whew! I mean, that's pretty close. Pretty egregious. I guess you have to make it more modern when it's text like that, Why throw Suzanne Collins and Stephanie Meyer under the bus? That's what I'm asking. From 2013, William Boyd. "Lightly tanned, he was slim, about my height, 6 feet 1 inch, and had short dark hair with no trace of gray. I knew people would ask me to describe him with more precision. There was a scar on his right cheek. He was even featured, though there was something hard about his looks." From The Driver. "He had short dark hair with a little gray. There was a scar on his face running horizontally from his earlobe, across his cheek, and terminating just below his right nostril. He was even featured, although there was something hard about his looks." William Boyd. "The hall table was bare, apart from a healthy-looking spider plant in a pewter vase." The Driver. "There was a healthy-looking spider plant standing in a pewter vase." You see where this is going. And in the Reddit posts, it goes over and over and over, more and more examples from these Mark Dawson books. Here's another one from another source. This comes from the book I, Sniper by Stephen Hunter that features, and I cannot believe this, the main character, Bobby Lee Swagger. I cannot let myself go on a tangent about this. This is a whole other podcast episode. I cannot believe it. In 2009, right, I, Sniper, this is written by Stephen Hunter. 2009, it says, "He settled in, feeling the tension in the trigger, finding his stock weld, sliding to the eyepiece, and seeing the world through the mil-dot-rich reticle." In 2014, Mark Dawson's book Tarantula. "The man settled behind the rifle. He felt the tension in the trigger, found his stock weld, and slid up to the eyepiece, staring into it and seeing the ridge and the trees and the vegetation through the mil-dot-rich reticle." I, Sniper, 2009. "Then pulling out his Kestrel 4000 weather station and noting the wind, humidity, and temperature." Mark Dawson, 2014, Tarantula. "Took out a small weather station and noted the wind, the humidity, and the temperature." So here's the issue. In cases where there's just one single line that seems to feel out of place, and then it comes to light that it's very similar to another work, you always, it kind of feels like, maybe this is just a coincidence. If it only happens one time, maybe you were inspired, maybe it's an homage. But repetition really makes it look a lot more damning. But here's my question to you, right? Okay, so I can't say if Mark Dawson plagiarized his work, but I do want to have a discussion about if he did. Let me play devil's advocate, right? Does taking a line of description from another work lessen the story? Let's say I was really inspired by this line about bookcases being, a peek into a personality. If that's the only line that I was to put into my novel, knowing that this was written by someone else, but I really liked it, I liked the imagery, I liked the vibe, and I put that into my story, does that change our consideration about how original the story is? If it had just been a single example in these cases of this Reddit post that claimed Mark Dawson had taken from someone else, if this was just something that Dawson had highlighted in a book that he loved and he wanted to include it in his own work, would that take away from the overall story? Because I do think there's a difference between plagiarizing a line of prose and plagiarizing something larger. Even if 1,000 words total were taken from other works purely for prose and description and imagery, in this 80,000 plus word book, is that book now less original because of it? Because that's 1.25% of borrowed material. I mean, that still means this is 98.75% of original material. Now, I think the repetition paints it in a different light, but this is something that I'm interested to hear what you think about. Does including something like this take away from the experience of reading that whole book? Does it take away from the accomplishment of writing a whole book? I mean, we're still talking about Mark Dawson having created 80,000 other words of originality to tell the story, even though these singular moments of imagery or sensation or description might be allegedly less than original. I want to hear what you have to think about this. I think it's a really interesting sort of concept. Now, let me tell you about another story. And this one is really the one I've been super obsessed with. I'd like to introduce you to the first character of our story, Lynn Freeman. In 2002, Lynn Freeman sits down and begins to work on a manuscript, one that would take her years to complete. It's a story based on her own life experiences growing up in Alaska, and it combines her love of the paranormal romance, like Twilight, and these almost storybook moments from her own life that she weaves together into something original, and it takes her 8 years to finish her manuscript. And when Lynn Freeman finishes her manuscript, it's time to go to the next step, right? Lynn starts to reach out to agents, trying to bring this story to publishers. That's the dream. And now, enter the second character of our story, the agent, Emily Kim. Emily Kim connects with Lynn Freeman and wants to represent her. And this begins a 3-year journey of refining that story, refining that manuscript. And Lynn Freeman claims that she sent her agents over 40 versions of this manuscript, changing and altering things based on feedback that would be more enticing to publishers. And in this entire process, really only one editor responds, an editor named Stacey Abrams at Entangled Publishing, a really big publisher. And then, after trying for 3 years, Lynn Freeman's story is effectively shelved, and the agent, Emily Kim, moves on. Fast forward to 2021, and Lynn Freeman's at the bookstore with her son. She sees a book that looks right up her alley. She picks it up. You can tell by the cover that it is like extremely inspired by Twilight. And it's a book called Crave by author Tracy Wolff. So she takes this book up, she's takes it home, starts reading, and is left reeling when she starts to see similarities between this YA romance international bestseller and that manuscript that she shelved years ago. In a great write-up by The New Yorker, journalist Katie Waldman shows the similarities like this. Freeman immediately spotted similarities to her own unpublished book. The main character was named Grace, not Anna, and her love interest was a vampire, not a werewolf, but in both stories, the heroine moves from San Diego to Alaska after members of her family are killed in an accident. She lives with the only two relatives that she believes that she has left, both of whom are witches. A female rival slips her drugs. There's an intimate moment underneath the northern lights, and in a climactic scene, an evil vampire kidnaps her, and she ends up accidentally freeing a different vampire whose return is said to herald the end of the world. And in Freeman's planned sequel and Wolff's actual sequels, this vampire replaces the previous hero as the main character's primary love interest. In addition to what Freeman felt to be the book's obvious similarities, Crave, to her mind, contained details that could have only have come from her own life. The novel's opening scene describes flying in a puddle jumper above the Alaskan landscape. Freeman's grandfather had been a bush pilot, and she recalls reminiscing to Kim about what it had been like to go up in this tiny plane. A fantastical chessboard figures early on in Crave, and a wall-sized painting of a fantastical chessboard hangs in Freeman's office. Wolff's heroine is revealed to be a gargoyle, and Freeman collects gargoyles. They guard the path to the front door of her former home. So who is this author, Tracy Wolff, and how did this happen? So Lynn Freeman searches for the author online, and wait a minute, she recognizes her. She has met Tracy Wolff before. In fact, in 2012, her then agent, Emily Kim, introduced Freeman to another author at a romance writers convention. The author, Tracy Deebs, goes by the pen name Tracy Wolff, and she's now the star client of Emily Kim. In the acknowledgments of Crave was the name Stacey Abrams, which is the only editor who responded to Lynn Freeman's manuscript all of those years ago, still working at the Entangled publishing house, who has now published the entire Crave series. And when Lynn Freeman sent a letter threatening legal action in 2022, she received a response saying that neither Tracy Wolff nor the publisher were aware of Freeman or her manuscript. More so, the agent Emily Kim recalls nothing of this manuscript. Let's talk about tropes, because in this lawsuit, it's pretty clear that the defense is going to discuss how romantasy as a genre has very particular tropes. Look, so romance as a whole is almost marketed by its tropes, and I think that still extends to romantasy. I want an enemies to lovers. I want a friends to lovers book. I want a love triangle. I want a book where the love interest is the bodyguard trying to protect us. I mean, there's hundreds. Okay, maybe not hundreds. There's definitely dozens, dozens of tropes in romance that extend to romantasy, and that's how people find books that they want to read. You know what you like. How many of these stories include a brooding male lead, a tall, dark-haired, dangerous lover? How many of these books have shifting romances and kidnapping and spicy scenes? What about more specific stuff, like vampire or fae or werewolf societies and alpha males and betas? If you can imagine, it's probably been done before. Gargoyles instead of vampires? It's been done. A main character flying in a small bush plane? It's been done. A spicy scene under the northern lights? I hate to tell you, it's been done. And if it comes down to just saying that this iteration of the trope wasn't originally done by Freeman, then the defense could probably find an example of all of these different things that Freeman includes in her manuscript that she claims is also in Crave and was taken from her. But the more specific examples come from that one singular work, the more damning that evidence feels. And we saw that in the case with Mark Dawson. That New Yorker article compares the two books like this. Other similarities are harder to explain away. In both books, the heroine's parents bind her powers with tea. The male lead is guilty and grief-stricken over his older brother's murder. I scoffed when I saw that Freeman's side had listed shining white quartz as a similarity, referring to the fact that in both works the heroine is brought to a marble building with white columns. But the quartz scenes have more than architecture in common. In each, the main character is transported to a timeless place presided over by a green-eyed woman. The heroine feels a sense of belonging. She's told that this is the home of her ancestors. In Wolfe's version of the scene, there are thick white candles burning in golden candelabras. Is that how you say that? In Freeman's, there are candles flickering to life in all of the wall sconces. You can't copyright candles any more than you can copyright marble or ancestors or green-eyed women. But the composition of these details, the totality of how the obvious or ordinary beats are strung together in each, is startling. I highly recommend that you look at this New Yorker article. It's in the show notes, and the link to the actual lawsuit is also there. And that's where I would recommend you can go to form your own opinion. But what does all of this mean for you and me? For those of us who are in this situation of wanting to pursue self-publishing or even traditional publishing, it is a necessity that you have to share your work with an agent, with an editor, with a publishing house. And what protections do you have with your story? It's really hard to say because of this idea of, is this inspiration? Is this an iteration on an existing trope? Or is this theft of an idea? And proving it in court, which is what Freeman's going to have to do, is a lot harder than just saying this feels like it wasn't stolen or this feels like it was. It's that burden of proof. And look, I've heard other writers, especially in places like the Writing Theory Discord, who mention worries like this. I've seen people say, I want to share this story, but I'm worried someone's going to steal it. And I have to tell you, it's so unlikely. I mean, of course we're talking about this case, but especially in the situation of being in a place like, in this case, the Writing Theory Discord, even if someone saw your premise, saw what you were planning on writing, and chose to write it themselves, of course, those final results are going to be so different. Unless you are copying someone's homework and you don't change it enough, you might get into trouble. But if you copy that homework and you change it enough, you're going to end with two pretty different stories. Two people writing the same story would never do it the same way. And yet, look what we're talking about. In most every case, sharing details of your story is harmless, and it's a necessity you have to go through in sharing your writing so you can learn how to write better, or in sharing your writing and getting critique from others, or sharing your writing and just enjoying the ability to be able to have someone read your work. Sharing your entire manuscript 99.9% of the time is going to be harmless, but the closer that you get to the top, the closer that you get to the people who are in places where a potentially nefarious action can lead to huge rewards, well, then maybe the more likely it may be. What are your thoughts on the case? I'd love to hear your opinions or other content that you find that helps paint a more cohesive picture of the situation. I've been fascinated with this because this is not a very common occurrence in our space. And I hope that, if there is, a result to this legal action, that I hope it's done in a way that puts some protection on the stories that you write. You should be able to iterate on tropes. You should be inspired by the work that you like. But you should also be protected in some way, and it'll be very interesting to see how this resolves. If you like this episode, then let me know. The best way you can support this podcast is to like it or rate it on whatever platform you are listening from. And let me know. Leave a comment. Or even come over to our Discord. You can find the link under any of my YouTube videos at the Writing Theory YouTube channel, and contribute to the conversation. We have some really good discussions over in the Discord. It's a lot of fun. I love hearing your thoughts on these sort of things, and I want to hear more of it. So if you want to be a bigger part of the Writing Theory community, you can follow the podcast, you can rate it, you can subscribe to the YouTube channel, and you can come join the Discord. Can't wait to see you guys next Monday. Take care.